Welcome again to another session of Business Data Science with Delali. And today we are going to continue our discussion on large language model evaluation, or LLM eval. Okay, if you have not watched our previous video on large language model evaluation yet, I'm linking that right here for you so that you can watch it and then you can follow through on this particular video. Okay, in the last video, we talked about 3 lenses through which you can evaluate large language models. And today we are going to dive deeper into each of these 3 lenses, how I call it 3 lenses of what? Evaluating large language models. If you recall, we talked about 3 different lenses. The first one was online versus offline type of evaluation. The second one was, statistical or mathematical based type of evaluation versus human or manual eval versus LLM-as-a-Judge type of evaluation. And then finally we also talked about what I call the aspect of model performance based type of evaluation. Okay, so today we are going to dive deeper into that, and I will be really talking about some of the details of how this works. And so hopefully I'll be sharing my screen and showing some slides, and hopefully that will be very, very useful for you. Okay, so now let's get right into it. Okay, the first one is offline versus online. So what is actually offline LLM evaluation? Okay, well, offline evaluation is when the model is tested without any real-time user interaction. Okay, and so this actually happens on a predefined data set. You have your model, you basically test the model's performance on a predefined data set. Okay, so how it works is this, right? The model responses are generated for a set of questions that you already know the true answers for. Okay, and then you basically perform some scoring automatically based on this model answers. Okay, again, you are using some predefined prompt or questions to actually see how the model will behave when it is not in production yet. Okay, and then you basically score the performance, and you can score this based on many different scores. So accuracy as you define it, or you can use blue or Rauch scores. These are scores that are actually used to understand or evaluate the output of a large language model based on a reference data set. And we can talk about those metrics in detail, but for now let me just explain broadly how the offline evaluation works. Okay, so everything is done really before the model is deployed. Okay, a very good example of that is, let's say you have your GPT-4 model and you run it on a benchmark data like the MMLU data set, or any data set at all, and then you basically just look at the answers. Okay, so you do all of this without the model being deployed. Okay, so that's the key. Offline. Okay, it's not online. You are not evaluating it during when it is online. Okay, so what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of doing offline evaluation? Number one, it is very fast. You can easily repeat it, and it is very cost effective. Okay, number two, it's very easy to compute. You can compare different models and see how they work. Okay, without worrying about how they will perform in the hands of users, because you are doing all of this offline. Okay, now the disadvantage is that sometimes they may not capture the real world use cases, and so that evaluation may not actually reveal all the issues that you have with the model. Okay, and sometimes too, this offline evaluation can lead to something that we call overfitting, where maybe the model is performing very well on your reference data, but in real life they're not performing well. But again, that's just the trade-off between doing online versus offline evaluation. Okay, so that's about offline. What about online? Okay, now it's really the opposite of offline. Okay, so for online evaluation, the model is right in deployment. You are collecting live interaction with users. Okay, and then you evaluate that. So how that works typically is that there are some real users using your model. For example, you have a chatbot, actual users are using it, and then you collect user feedback, like for example thumbs up, thumbs down, user satisfaction. You can do things like understanding the sentiment of that. You can actually do even A/B tests to compare different models, in production. Okay, so in this case, the model is in deployment. Okay, so that's how it typically works for what? Online LLM evaluation. Okay, an example is, like I said, just collecting user satisfaction scores, or sentiment scores, up vote versus down vote. All of those are happening when the model is in production, and so they are called what? Online evaluation. So in short, here are the major differences between online versus offline. But even before that, let me talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of online LLM evaluation. The advantage is like you can capture the true user experience, which I said before, and some of the edge cases that may happen in production, you'll be able to capture them and adjust your model when needed. Okay, the disadvantage though is that it is very slow and it is very costly. Sometimes there are some ethical concerns because you just don't know what you are putting into production before actually evaluating it. Okay, so sometimes there may be some ethical concerns, but overall it's not bad. In practice, you have to do a combination of both the online and offline evaluation to get the best result. Okay, so here are the major differences between the online evaluation versus the offline evaluation. So there are differences in terms of timing. So online is when it is in deployment, offline is before deployment. You can see the differences in the data here. In terms of data, basically online is for live user interaction data, and then offline is pre-collected data. Okay, it is very fast and controlled for offline, whereas online is usually generally slow. Okay, and then offline uses benchmark for this type of work, whereas online is mostly used for like fine-tuning. So anyway, so this is one of the lenses through which you can evaluate a large language model. Okay, another lens through which I mentioned you can evaluate large language model is statistical versus manual versus LLM-as-a-Judge. Okay, and so let me explain what those means. I think they are very self-explanatory, but let me just quickly explain. Okay, so statistical evaluation is really using automatic mathematical based scores, okay, to compare the model to some ground truth. Sometimes we call them golden data. Okay, so in this case you can calculate metrics like accuracy, F1 score. You can still do the blue score, the route or the exact match. Okay, these are some of the ways that you can actually use automatic or mathematical or statistical based approach to evaluate your large language model. Okay, the advantage of this statistical evaluation is that it is very fast, it is cheap, you can really scale that. Okay, and also the objective is very clear, and it's actually easy to reproduce. So it is very objective. Okay, and you can easily reproduce that. Okay, so that's the advantage. The disadvantage is that this is language, so sometimes this mathematical or statistical scores like F1 or accuracy doesn't actually capture the nuances in languages. So that's the problem, and sometimes it's also very difficult to apply this on open-ended type of questions. Okay, but anyway, that's one way or one lens through which you can look at this. So statistical method or mathematical based approach of LLM evaluation. Okay, now there's also the human evaluation. Okay, this is very simple. For human evaluation, basically we have actual humans look at the output of the model, read through them and give us some grading of how they think the model is performing based on some criteria that we define. So you can define maybe answer quality, answer relevancy, answer accuracy, whatever, and then you define this for humans, and then the humans will go through and then label each large language model output according to some predefined metric. Okay, so it's very good, In fact, I can say that this is truly still the most reliable way, even though it has its own disadvantages. Okay, now the advantage of this human or manual evaluation is that it can capture all nuances, all the subtleness that we see in languages. You can capture all of that. It is very flexible. You can actually customize whatever you want to evaluate. Okay, but the disadvantage is that it is very expensive and slow. You have to find human beings to like create LLM output, label them. It is very slow. Okay, it is also very subjective. Different humans may react to the labeling exercise or that evaluation very differently, and it is very hard to scale. How can you get thousands of cases, human beings sitting down and evaluating them? Okay, so anyway, but that's one of the ways. Okay, so finally, I want to also talk about using LLM as a judge. Okay, what does this mean? This is an extension of the human eval, where you actually, instead of actually having humans actually evaluate this, you will actually create some new prompts, often using a higher or bigger LLM model to evaluate a less capable one. Okay, so you just create prompts. Okay, so this is what we say using LLM as a judge. So you create prompt and also and actually ask the large language model to evaluate the output of another large language model. So you can do something like, hey, you are a helpful and critical judge. Which of these two answers are better and why? Okay, and you can ask the model, the LLM model, to do different kinds of things based on how you prompt it. Okay, the advantage of this is that you can actually scale it. It is very fast. You can run it on a lot of cases, so it is actually very cheap, and you can capture some of the nuances better than the statistical method. Okay, and you can actually scale this. But the disadvantage is that sometimes these LLM judges they might have their preferences. They are not 100% reliable. The quality actually depends on how you create a prompt. So if you don't really create a prompt well, you might be getting some result that is labeled by this judge to be good, but really not good. Okay, but this approach, what I call statistical versus human versus LLM as a judge, is also another lens through which you can actually evaluate large language models. Okay, finally, the third lens through which I think you can really evaluate your large language model is what I call aspects of model performance based evaluation. Okay, meaning that you actually evaluate your LLM based on the different aspects of the model performance. Okay, I mean, these are not generic types or generic lenses defined. This is my own way of describing the various approaches of evaluating large language model. Okay, so number 3 lens is what I call aspects of model performance based. Okay, I'm going to explain this for you so you can truly understand. Give you some examples. Okay, the first category under this is what is called the intrinsic evaluation. Okay, intrinsic meaning that you are actually evaluating the internal performance of the large language model, the accuracy, the reasoning, the fluency of the model. Okay, you can use metrics like perplexity, which actually measures how well the model predicts a sample. Okay, so that's perplexity score. You can use that, or you can use things like the blue or the RAG score. All of those things are intrinsic because we are evaluating the internal workings of the model. Okay, now there is a second type that is called the extrinsic evaluation. Okay, here you look at the model's performance in the real world in terms of like when you apply it on real world problems. Okay, here is mostly looking at things like task-based evaluations, looking at the accuracy, or even looking at using human evaluators that we describe. Is really an extrinsic type of evaluation. Okay, so we talked about intrinsic, we talked about extrinsic type of evaluation. You can also do what is usually called qualitative evaluation. Okay, here you analyze the error of the that the output is producing. You try to understand how is this error coming across. Basically examine this error very well and understand what are some of the limitations of the model. Okay, so it's a qualitative evaluation, and you can actually even conduct case studies where you actually look at the model performance through different cases or capabilities to just understand how the model actually perform. Okay, so that's what I call the qualitative evaluation. Then you can do safety and bias type of evaluation. So is this model safe? Is it fair, the answers that the model is giving? For example, if you ask questions about females versus males, or blacks versus whites, like how is the model responding? So you can do those types of bias and safety, basically adversarial testing, where you can evaluate the model through that lens as well. Okay, and then moving on, you can have a user experience type of evaluation where you actually evaluate the model based on the experience that is creating when people are using it. Okay, so that's the user experience evaluation. You can look at interaction quality, you can look at user studies, and just to understand how does the model perform when users are actually using it. So you evaluate how well a model maintains the conversation, the context, the response, whether those responses are relevant and all of that. Okay, those fall under the user experience evaluation. And then finally, the robustness evaluation. So here you can do what is called stress testing, right? When you actually bring some challenging questions, you ask the model hard questions. How does the model respond in those cases, right? If you want to scale the model to be able to understand a lot of things, how does the model perform in terms of that? So all of these types of assessments are what I call the aspects of model performance based evaluation. So you can see I mentioned 6 things under that. Okay, those 6 things are intrinsic evaluation, extrinsic evaluation, qualitative evaluation, safety and bias evaluation, user experience evaluation, and then robustness evaluation. Okay, now here is how I'll end this. Just using only one lens of LLM evaluation doesn't really work. It is always helpful to combine all these methods based on your use case. Sometimes the methods can be nested. What I mean by that is that within online versus offline, you may use human evaluation or statistical evaluation or LLM-as-a-Judge, right? And then within something like intrinsic evaluation, you may use human evaluation or statistical evaluation. And so you could nest all of these methods, but my way of simplifying this for you, especially knowing that we don't want to do too technical on this channel, is to give you these 3 lenses through which you can look at LLM evaluation. Okay, so the first lens, if you remember, is what? Online versus offline. The second one is using statistical methods or automatic metrics versus using humans versus using LLM as a judge. Okay, so that's the second lens. Okay, and then finally is using what I just described as the aspect of model performance based type of LLM evaluation. Here's the thing, LLM evaluation is a very broad topic on its own. Okay, but it is the most important thing nowadays for data scientists to understand, even for business professionals to understand, because we are all using AI. How do we know that the AI is working? And that's what LLM evaluation can help you. Hopefully this was very helpful, and we will continue this series in our next video. Thank you.